Dzień dobry. My father was Polish. Henryk Karbowski, which became Henry Carr, John Carr. He taught me many things. Dzień dobry, dziękuję. That was it in Polish, though. He married an Irish lady, okay? So my mother, so we only spoke English at home. Oh, and chodź do domu od razu. That was the other thing that I remember from my youth. But listen, let me just explain the thing about George Clooney and me, okay? So the day after I got the invitation to come here, George rang me up. He rings me all the time. You know, he wants advice about acting and what scripts to accept. So I mentioned that I just accepted an invitation to come to Warsaw to this conference. And he said, I've heard a lot about that conference. I'm going to come with you. So I should have sent his picture and my picture, but I forgot to send my picture. So only his picture appears. But unfortunately, George does send his apologies. He's very sorry he couldn't be here. So anyway, now, more seriously. So yesterday, as I was coming through Heathrow, I bought a copy of The Guardian, which I do pretty much every day. I get it online as well, of course, being a modern man. And this was the front page story in the main supplement. And you can't read it, so I'll read it for you. The perfect storm is Instagram making you miserable. Okay? The same day, in another of our national newspapers, the Daily Telegraph, huge story about the way in which children's privacy rights and the way in which companies, social media companies, were not properly looking after them, in the opinion of many people, were creating a number of risks to children's mental health, physical health, self-esteem, and so on and so forth. And 3 weeks ago, a front-page story on The Times of London, one of our major national newspapers, the story was, and it was the only story on the front page, social media creating a crisis in children's mental health. So within the United Kingdom right now, these questions about the impact of social media on children's lives in general and on their privacy in particular is huge. The debate is huge. Brexit, forget about it. Unimportant, a detail compared with this. So when our Parliament passed the GDPR to implement the new data privacy rules, our Parliament inserted a new clause, which I don't think any other country has done, requiring our data protection authority to draw up a specific code describing how companies should respond and respect children's rights to privacy. And they did that not just because of responding to media pressure, although of course politicians always respond to media pressure, but because of an increasing volume of research that was emerging from our universities in Britain and around the world, showing the actual effects of social media on some children, and some of these effects were very disturbing and worrying. Now, most children, most of the time, will be okay. There's no question about that. But all children, some of the time, can go through periods of their life when they're feeling vulnerable, or you've just had your first major disagreement with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, or your parents are giving you a hard time. And that these moments, the way in which social media interacts with them can have a decisive influence, not just on their health there and then, but on their entire future lives. And so what we're looking at is ways of spelling out to the companies what their obligations are to keep children safe, because privacy bleeds into and is an important part of the way in which children's wider lives work when they go online. If you want to look at some of the academic evidence, I suggest you look at a document published by the Norwegian Consumer Council. It's called Deceived by Design, and it shows you how 3 big companies that they looked at, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft, are consistently and deliberately creating spaces on the internet, on their platforms, which are designed to encourage you to disclose more and more information about yourself, designed to keep you on the platform for as long as possible. And this is having a very bad effect on some children's health. And one of the examples they gave, for example, was if you go into, I think it was Facebook or, no, Google's privacy settings, it took you something like 30 clicks to get to the point where your data was protected to the greatest extent possible, and it only took one click to get to the point where you disclosed a very much greater amount of information. There's research showing how some of these companies in Silicon Valley, they are employing some of the smartest, cleverest psychologists in the world, coming out of universities from all around the world, paying them gigantic salaries, and their only instruction is find a way to bring people to the site, keep them there, and disclose as much information as possible, because it's that data that gives them their money, that makes them their profits. And some of these people have been interviewed, and you know, they do things like they work out, if I make this button blue and I put it at the top left-hand corner of the page, will it get more clicks? Or if I make it gold and put it on the right-hand side of the page, will I get more clicks? And all of these things are working for adults. So even adults are having difficulties, as it were, coping with these things, and yet children are in the same environments and having similar sorts of difficulties, or even greater ones. So what we're saying is every aspect of the way social media companies construct their site or service, they have to be able to justify to our Data Privacy Commissioner and explain how it helps preserve children's rights, how it helps preserve children's health, and they're not entitled to assume that the same tricks that they use to get adults to disclose information or engage with them are allowed when it comes to children. It's completely unacceptable the way that's been going on. And fantastic those social media companies have been in many, many ways. They haven't been fantastic in every way. Because some children in particular who are very needy, you know, they want, if you're not getting 100 likes a day, if people aren't reading your posts, if people aren't, you know, responding to the things that you're posting there, it's causing some children huge sort of crises and leading them into self-harming, in some cases suicide, and it is having terrible, now it's not many, but the point is it shouldn't be any, and the companies have to take greater responsibility for that. Finally, before I move on, just to give you an example of the kind of things that we are discussing in Britain, is what we're going to try and do is get the companies not to send any real-time updates or pings during the night when a child should be sleeping. Children turning up at school without having had a proper night's sleep because their mobile phone is next to them in the bed and it's pinging all night and they're waking up and reading it and so on. It's become a big issue. Lots and lots of teachers in schools are saying that the kids are coming in half asleep because they've been on social media all night. That's got to stop. And the social media companies can make it stop. It shouldn't be a challenge for parents and teachers to make these things right. It's a challenge for the companies to make these things right. And even though we want parents to engage, we want teachers to engage, also we want the companies to engage and do their bit to ensure that these kinds of bad things are not happening in the way that they have been doing to children. So, right, I'm going to stop, okay, because we're running short of time, and I'm going to move seamlessly, yeah, smoothly, like George Clooney would,